Great. Hey everybody, I'm with Jamie Catto. We're just talking about not being present or being present and patterns around love connection. So continue.
Yeah, I just noticed that in all my previous relationships before this one, it was all about just keeping the woman. Whatever happened, it can't end. I was in such a state of addiction. I put her or the relationship on such a pedestal that I would put up with anything. And anything, any faintest thing on the horizon that could even possibly be leading to this non-zero probability of replacement abandonment, I would be on hypervigilant alert. You know, poor woman couldn't go to a Five Rhythms Gabrielle Roth dance without me having to go to, under the guise of I wanted to come and dance too, but it was total bullshit.
You were
It was
watching
to
her
make sure she didn't. Exactly. It was policing.
and watching the men who go to Five Rhythms dance. I know some of those men. I don't blame you for going to the Five Rhythms
Yeah,
dance.
no, the high risk environment. That's why I would go.
But I get
But
it.
it
So
never
you were
worked.
doing everything to contain it so that rather than just being authentically you and risking the possibility that it just doesn't work.
Yeah, or yeah, exactly. Anything but not risk anything that even resembled the potential tiniest threat of replacement abandonment.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and and I think the other thing is that I had always not I'm not so into psychotherapy talk, but just to risk it for a moment, I had always been so recreating my unavailable mother.
Mhm.
So every woman I was with actually genuinely was a fucking handful. Excuse my language.
Mhm.
Everyone was actually half one foot out the door. I need to open to other men, whatever it was, having affairs. I actually had genuinely chosen women I was right to be afraid of that happening. And
So
none of
you
the
you you were a fuser and you picked isolators as a matter of pattern.
yeah, and escapers. Yeah,
And that's because that's where your charge was. Is that
I
basically how
think
you
it just
understand it?
I understand it as like that's what I received as a small child. So that's what I thought was normal. So that's what I associated with love, and chose normalness rather than actual love. And
Mm-hmm.
actually, what tended to happen is if there was anyone who was really into me in a healthy way, I would look at them as
You'd
unattractive.
you'd lose the charge. So thank you for saying this. I'm just writing a course about this, and I covered some of this in Uncommon Bond in many ways.
Yeah, you
But
did.
but I feel like having sort of the energetic charge around the unavailable, if you grew up as the with an unavailable, particularly opposite sex parent, is
Yeah,
just fundamental to the human psyche. It's just like basic level, and I've worked with so many clients, Jamie, who are only attracted to people who aren't attracted to them, because on some level they want to finally win that. They want to finally claim victory over the unavailable and finally get the love of the opposite sex parent. And the moment that person finally gets corralled and contained and looks them in the eye and says, "I'm right here, you're amazing," they're like, "You have no credibility anymore because you do not reflect my childhood dynamics. I have
yeah.
no
If you
interest
think
in
I'm
you. I
great,
don't
must
think
be
I'm
something
great.
wrong with you.
Why? What the fuck's wrong with you if you think I'm a great catch?"
Exactly that.
Yeah, this is a really deep and tough one, honestly.
Mm.
A lot of
And
people trapped in that.
that hasn't been happening with my present girlfriend Anika, who I adore. And it began very much with like a mutual adoration thing, and yet it has still in recent times bumped into a few you know doubts. But the difference is that we've both done quite a lot of different avenues of exploration and have a very mutual vocabulary for knowing the difference between authentic and escaping communication, responsible and
Great,
irresponsible language.
great.
And even though we do often sort of bump or kind of close down to each other, we're both very, very quick to make a bid for reconnection and authenticity. And that's been revolutionary.
Fantastic.
It's about the willingness to find reconnection more interesting than the deliciousness of the drama.
Nice. There's the transition to healthy relating right there.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of, it's been really great like that. Um, So yeah, that's where I'm at. About to go deep into exploring my sexual wounding. I've explored a lot of wounding, but I've never explored my sexual wounding, like feelings of inadequacy, feelings of addiction around got to keep the woman no matter what. unless I'm the best lover you've ever had, unless I'm the best this, best that, unless there's, there's a perfectionist, very unhealthy perfectionism, unless I'm mirrored to be the best in every possible way that anyone could ever be the best, then I feel there's threat. And I start seeing threat when there isn't threat.
And as though love could ever really be rooted in our bestness or our
Yeah,
achievements or our egoic glory, or I mean, they can be impressed, but I don't know if that has anything to do with the feelings of love, right?
yeah. So I don't know what's ahead. Like it is a really new area, and I think it's like I'm a bit sort of funny in the way that I teach. Like, I have the idea at 9 o'clock. I'm teaching it at 10, uh, because of the opposite of due diligence. But I often find that like teaching what I'm going through, or like just bringing what I'm going through to the group or to the one-on-one session, is a way that I discover it with my attendees rather than learn about it, ground it, be an expert in it, and then bestow it. I'm not a big bestower. I'm more about, hey, I'm in the middle of this. Let's all explore it together, kind of a teacher.
Well, I like right now what you're doing, which sounds like the same thing. You're speaking from this moment in your process, and feels more alive. I did tons of radio, and I would have kind of an internal script and go down my script, and now I like just doing stuff where I'm just where I am, and I get to speak from where I am, and it's so much more liberating. I don't have to prepare anything. I mean,
Yeah, if you
my
don't mind
life
what
is
other
the
people think,
preparation, you know?
if you don't mind what other people think, if you're not like
Yeah.
maintaining a mask of look how holy I am.
Yeah, no, we tore that one down a long time ago. So Jamie, let me make sure to read your bio. Just give people some context for our conversation, although your internal experience is enough context. I'm going to read the Tom Robbins quote because I think it's so sweet. Jamie Catto is a human icebreaker with a prow of determination and a motor of love slicing through the frozen seas around us. It's so poetic and dramatic. Good
Uh,
God, try living up to that one.
yeah,
Um, I'll read the rest. Jamie Catto is an author, filmmaker. We're going to talk about your film today, and musician running transformational workshops and events to reclaim all the treasure we edited away into the shadows and facilitate everyone daring to be more real, more fallible, more tender, more intimate. His mission is to create a world full of walking permission slips. I love that. Where we all lighten up and enjoy the unpredictable human path together with humor, playfulness, and a healthy dose of irreverence. Jamie's workshops and one on ones provide a refreshing approach to inner work with the right dose of playfulness and depth. He facilitates these professional, personal, and creative breakthroughs by drawing from his own processes in groundbreaking film production, philosophy, voyages, and music career. Evolution and enlightenment happen a lot quicker and easier when we treat the whole process as entertainment instead of working on ourselves. And you can find him at Jamie Catto, JamieCatto.com.
thank you.
So, yeah, no, thank you. So, can we talk about the Ram Dass film?
Well,
Yeah. So you know that I knew him.
yeah.
I made Carmageddon with him. He was in Carmageddon. I had many conversations with him. Independent of that, I went to Maui one or two times. I had a whole 2-day process with him, which I really wish we had filmed. And he
Mm,
permissioned me to talk about it and write about it, and where I basically was accusing him of being a spiritual bypasser, and a name changer and all of that stuff. And he had my book Soul Shaping. He had the dictionary. He had a copy of the dictionary. I guess I'd emailed it to them before I got to Maui. And we had good feelings because of Carmageddon, and we did some healing there. And he cried and thanked me. He did some healing around Bhagavan and all that stuff he was carrying, and he said some things that are in the film that were at that time pretty radical. Like he'd been
yeah,
waiting decades to finally say it on camera, and he said it. But when we had this conversation, I was sort of saying, look, I don't, this all feels bypassy to me. Your name's Richard Alpert. You call yourself Ram Dass. You know, and so we got into it, and he said, I said, where's the psychotherapeutic piece? What about emotional process? And he shunned that. It was like, therapy has nothing to do with spirituality, and enlightenment comes to who it comes to, all this monkey business. So I said, that feels really bypassy. It's like you're just not wanting to deal with your shadow. So he goes, no, you get enlightened when you have a stroke or you have a car accident. I said, what, you can't get enlightened going into therapy? I mean, you have to have these dramatic things happen. Therapy's not dramatic enough. So we went through 2 days of it. And at the end of it, I pushed him, and he was brave. At the end of the first day, he took that dictionary and he was in his wheelchair and he said, come back tomorrow. And that way, so he sort of stormed away, but in that cute way, because he's courageous. He was engaged.
Really, yeah.
Yeah, he's willing to participate in the conversation. So he came back the next day, he had some pushback, and I had some pushback. And then at the very end of it, and I didn't include this in grounded spirituality, it wasn't necessary. And because I don't actually agree with it now, he said, he goes, you're right, Jeff. I am a spiritual bypasser. I'm a spiritual bypasser. And that was the end. That was the end of the conversation. That was it. And then he lovingly gave me a cookie, and then he went off and he did that. And I came to not really feel that was true. I felt with respect to the emotional process piece, he was bypassing. But in most other ways, he wasn't, because he really was moving from his heart as a spiritual experience, which feels very not bypass to me.
Yeah.
He did an extraordinary amount of grounded service work. This is not a guy who just went into the meditation cave and waited for the milk to be served. And, he went to work. What he did was save a foundation, all of those things. And when I said the one thing that was confusing me in my process, this is the last thing I want to say about this, and I want to hear your thoughts on this. So many of these people that I was interviewing around sort of Maharaji, the Neem team, I call it, I would say, how can Bhagavan claim to be enlightened when he's so out of integrity? This is my question, in his behavior. And so many of the men would say, enlightenment comes to who it comes to. It doesn't matter your moral state. And I thought, well, that's convenient. It means you can do anything you want and claim you're awakened. You don't have to work on anything about yourself. And it just comes to who it comes to magically. So I said that to Ram Dass, and he said no. So this wasn't a bypasser. He said, you have to be able to justify yourself on every plane of awareness. I paraphrase him.
Yeah.
So in your experience with him, with respect to this question of spiritual bypassing, this question of integration, inclusivity, because you encountered him after I encountered him at the latter stages of his life. Was he a spiritual bypasser? I mean,
well,
or was he not, or was he just all of these things at one time?
I mean, all of them. There's two things I want to say, like to speak to the question and to what you just said. Like I met him when I was in my early 20s, so like in late 80s, and and in the two One Giant Leap movies, which he was in. What About Me in One Giant Leap, and in Becoming Nobody. So it was like different stages that I was
Did you
hanging
make
out.
the Leap movies, Jamie?
Yeah.
Oh, you did. Okay.
Yeah. One Giant Leap was around the world with musicians and thinkers.
I think
and
I remember.
50 countries of the cream of everyone all mushed together. And there was one moment in the movie Becoming Nobody where everyone, which is the moment everybody emails me about, which is me talking about processing discomfort or processing waves of weather or emotional discharge in the body. And then when I wake up in the morning, I feel this pressure on my chest and there's something wrong. Even before I've remembered I'm Jamie, something's wrong. And before it comes a thought like, oh, the brain is addicted to my comfort zone. So the moment I'm feeling discomfort, this is how I see it anyway. The moment I'm feeling discomfort in my body, the brain has got one agenda only, make that feeling go away. So immediately before it's maybe even noticed where in the body the feeling is, it's immediately like, what's the bank balance doing? What's going on in my relationship? Something that could match that feeling. Because it thinks if I can find a thought that matches that feeling and solve it, the feeling will go away. That's its agenda. So what I try and do is before my brain gets into head fucking about what it might be to make that feeling go away, I try and like cut the thought and just go literally into just the somatic
Stay in the feeling
and like mix a little bit of Taoist dissolving, Qigong dissolving, Vipassana scanning, just do the exact opposite of try and get rid of it, turn towards it with every fiber of my being, become a
Beautiful.
wine taster of that feeling so that I know what it smells like, what it tastes like, what
Buddy,
color.
that's
Such
grounded
a yes,
spirituality. That's grounded spirituality right there. That's
right.
beautiful. Yeah.
Just give it all my welcome and curiosity, and even sometimes interview it because it has a voice. Sometimes it wants to tell me stuff. So do some dialoguing with it and ask it stuff. It can
And
with the
can you
yin, with the
feel it?
listening.
Can you feel it? I mean, do you let yourself, if it's tears, do you let tears move? If it's rage, do you
Very
let
much,
rage move?
very much. And in fact, if I feel tears, it's like, oh, thank God. Because sometimes for me, tears, I believe tears is like, how Eckhart Tolle, who I also know you have reservations about, he talks about the pain body. I believe this great big lump of accumulated everything, emotional yuck that's in us, all the suppression, the body's genius plumbing system wants to flush it out. It's looking for idiots. It's looking for triggers so that it can have an overreaction, so that it can shit it out. And you have to feel those tears and everything on the way out. Today maybe a thimble, tomorrow maybe a cupful, the next day a bucket, who knows? Just have to say yes whenever it comes. But when tears come, which is one of the great plumbing functions of the emotional body for me, I sometimes, as a man, or maybe just as a person, I sometimes miss it. It's like I feel like a sneeze, Sometimes you almost sneeze, but it doesn't
Nice.
quite tip over, and it's like, oh damn. And I have that a lot with tears sometimes, which is why I make certain music to feel more. I've got an album on Sounds True called Internal Music for Dissolving, which is kind of for that. And so I very much want to feel it. Like I welcome it. Like often, if I'm feeling a depressive or a grief-filled feeling, and I don't even call them depressive or grief filled anymore because I think that can get in the way, it can limit it, but I call it schlumpf, or a word that means nothing, so that I'm not polluting it with other ideas. But when I feel those things, I want to moan more. I don't want to find a way to moan less. If I'm feeling kind of
Right.
I want to go I want to like be a laxative for more of it, as much as possible, because I trust the more of that gets discharged, the lighter I am tomorrow, and the less reactive and the less pickled by my own nonsense. So yeah, I'm very much about becoming a wine taster and turning towards my whole practice, and all my workshops really can come down to that kind of self-care, which is welcomingly, curiously turn towards with our yin, with our curiosity, be the space around it and let it expand, discharge, let the body's genius do it. We don't have to dictate how it's going to discharge any more than we tell our stomach how to digest carrots,
Mm.
or we tell our feet how to walk to the shop. We just have the intention. So like, just have the intention for it to do whatever the best thing it can do, and be a passenger, a willing passenger.
I mean, it's like, I mean, this is, there's nothing Tolkien about, I mean, the term pain body is like you're talking about a car part. I call it my tender woundedness. He wants you to witness it in the power of now, witness it, and somehow keep witnessing it like in a meditative stupor and tell yourself it's subdued, when in fact it's all still completely repressed and it's going to act itself out in every part of your life. What you're talking about is very, very much not what Ulrich Tolle is talking about. You're really talking about turning towards it, moving into the feeling, and finding transformation in the process. What I call repressed emotions as unactualized spiritual lessons, that the expansion lies in the heart of feeling, not in the heart of witnessing the feeling, like a patriarchal spiritualist trapped in the monkey mind, witnessing, watching the mind, pretending the mind's the issue when the mind's not the issue. As you and I both know, the monkey mind's not the issue, the monkey heart's the issue. If you don't go into the feelings, you're never going to change the thinking. So
So feeling it
I'm
all.
with you. So with that in mind, how with
Ramdas, when I said
right,
that, he
right,
was like, no, it's all
right.
here.
Yeah, right.
And
Yeah.
a lot of people in the audience were like, ooh, because it's not very current. It's not the body keeps score. It's not,
It
it's
well
old school.
that's the but that's his
Yeah.
bypass side, right?
So that's in the movie, and it's actually quite a cute moment because he's also kind of busting me as well. Like I'm, I'm not there to argue with him. I'm there to
Yeah.
showcase him. It's
Gotcha.
not. Um, but it was a really cool moment of disagreement in the film, and it's the thing that I get the most letters about, that moment in the film. Did he really think that?
Yes, he
Because I
really
heard,
thought that. Yes, he really thought
yeah, he
that.
did. But before he died, I heard from another someone that loved him that he had changed his mind about that, and that he realized he'd been disowning his body for years. And so in a lot of the Q&As when I was touring the movie across America, a lot of the Q&As we would talk about that. And I still, I for me, the body is such an important resource for me to not try and rationalize away. Oh, that's because when I was 6,
Hmm.
so what? Like, name it once. Okay, when you were 6, great, once. But then after that, certain people, they stay in psychotherapy for, I've been with my therapist 4 years. Really? Like, that doesn't sound like a good like good idea, like unless you're talking about different stuff, I guess. But I
Well,
believe
it,
that,
it it depends how much trauma there is,
sure.
and they may not be utilizing a technique that's actually helping them to transform because we don't have very many of those yet. So,
Yeah.
I'm not into the stuck guy in the room. I'm thinking, I mean, I get sometimes we go there and we don't want to do deeper work, and the therapist is fine until we're ready and all that. I get that. But I think the somatic practices are helpful because it's very easy to do that in the head tripping talk therapy model.
I've
Once
got
you
so much
start,
more to do. I've got so much more to do. It's funny. It's like there are certain things, certain Achilles heels, certainly around the replacement trauma, the jab thing,
Mhm.
that
Shall,
I've turned up to every one. Gone to the shamans, I've gone to the tapping, I've gone to the I've gone to the normal psychotherapist, I've done EMDR. EMDR I think has got some game. EMDR moved me the most out of any technique I've ever done. I was really I've had some extraordinary experiences with EMDR. um,
have you done bioenergetics, Jamie? I think you would love bioenergetics.
I think I'll check it out more. I think I
That's
did go to
hardcore. It's
one once, but
hardcore.
they were more talk. They got a bit stuck in talking to me about the Ramdas film. So I do think I've
Mm.
got to revisit somatic experiencing and bioenergetics.
Yeah, I mean, they're very different from each other, but
Are
bio
they?
is very, yeah. But I mean, I work with low and bio is very charged, very activated, very enlivened. And if you have a more passive tendency, that way of relating style, it's very enlivening and you can excavate stuff in the body with vitality and charge that you would never even know is inside of any more subtle somatic model. So
I'll
I
check it
really,
out.
are
I'd
you
like
in
to find
London
somebody in
area?
the
Are you in
UK.
London area?
Yeah, to find someone in
I
the
think
UK.
there's some good people. I'll send you some links.
Oh, that would be
So,
lovely.
where are you at with? How do you feel about the film now that the film is out, and what's happening with the film?
Yeah, I mean, I feel wonderful. It's very niche. Not a lot of people. It's the only film really that talks about death. I don't know if you've seen it.
I've seen part of it. Let's remind people of the name again.
It's called Becoming Nobody. It's
Becoming
now
Nobody.
streamable on all the Amazons and iTunes and Gaia and all kinds of places. Um, you know, I
Why did
I
you
think
name it Becoming Nobody?
because we couldn't anymore call it Walking Each Other Home, because in the time it took me to make the movie, he brought out a book called Walking Each Other Home, which is what I wanted to call it. And very much the second half of the film is very much death centered. It's very much about it's about death and dying, and about looking at it differently, and about what a taboo it is, and we don't tell the children, and like we're just in death denial in our culture, and so much of our ravagement of the planet and overconsumption and is in our death denial. And he talks about death very beautifully. It's been a central part of his work, working with dying people, and no one really talks about death and dying in a mainstream context. And um, because of that, Becoming Nobody was a good fit, and also because he was very close to, he died halfway through the DVD pre-sale. He died 4 months after it came out in the cinema, and the line, which is all about not being so busy being an ego, but not be busy trying to make ego the enemy either. Like his practice is, and I wanted to ask you your take on this actually. His practice and mine is, you're always going to be in an ego melodrama. As long as you've got a human body, there'll be part of you in an ego, me, self-protecting thing. And you can switch on another channel at the same time, not to get rid of the ego, not to say, well, it's all an illusion and negate it, to have that channel going on, which is a very natural part of our humanity, alongside a loving awareness part that isn't so sucked into the drama and can just watch it and go, oh, what a drama, but not be totally caught up in it and have more loving awareness
So,
simultaneously.
so that's the bifurcated nature of the patriarchal spiritual trip that he got ensnared in, where there's
Yeah.
only the unhealthy ego, which is the ego. They love bashing the ego in the mind, men, even though they're in their egos and trapped in their minds. And then the only place you can go to is this witnessing, cellular, loving awareness thing. I debated this with him. What's missing from that equation is something called the healthy ego, which means an honoring of the healthy selfhood. And patriarchal spirituality wants you to be nobody, not to be somebody. They're trying to get away from the pain of somebody. That's what men do in these
Uh-huh.
spiritual traditions. Everything's about getting away. They're like little kids that got their hand caught in the cookie jar and they pull it out and they pick up a Captain America shield and they have this great egoic, anti-egoic bullshit enlightenment version of reality that dishonors the self because they don't want to deal with messiness. That's why they love silence. That's why they love stillness, because noise and movement bring up their stuff. That's why they pull away from the world, because when they're in contact with the world, they have to deal with their stuff. So they create a version of spirituality that is based on these precepts that we then run around calling lineage and claim to be the only path of enlightenment, while the women in the village, who are seen as secondary and focused on mundane relational matters, are actually the ones that are holding the deepest experience of spirituality because they're deeply in their humanness. And that was his gig. I debated soul versus ego and healthy ego with him. We had the exact same conversation. I'd call him out. He'd say, "You're wrong." And at the end of it, he would go, "Well, yeah, I guess you're kind of right. There is something called a healthy ego. I couldn't have this conversation with you, Richard, if I didn't have a healthy ego, and you couldn't have it with me." And he would make these admissions, then he'd go right back to the Sangha and go back to the same patriarchal teachings. So I'm
Well,
glad to hear that at the end of his life, he was reclaiming his body and recognizing and honoring his
yeah.
localized
And,
selfhood.
and I don't necessarily like, I'm kind of all about both and not either or.
Great,
Like I
great.
want to be in a place which isn't so hung up with the ego, but not to negate it. Like, therefore it's bad. Someone wrote a very successful book recently, self-help book, called the Ego is the Enemy. And the moment I saw it, I was like, ugh.
It's just
Um,
it's childish.
yeah. So it's like you want to have it, but not have it be the decision maker, so to speak. You know what I mean?
Well, no,
Like,
you want your healthy ego very much involved in your decision making. You don't want your
yeah,
unhealthy narcissistic ego involved in the process.
yeah,
The problem is that, so I swing far away from the patriarchal nonsense and they swing far away from the worldly nonsense. And you're right that the answer lies in the middle, in the distinction between a healthy and unhealthy
yeah.
ego. I feel a pretty strong healthy ego coming off of you. I got no problem with that. That's what allows you to make brilliant films and bring your offerings into your workshops. So otherwise you wouldn't be able to take yourself seriously enough to feel like you have an offering.
Yeah.
Richard
The other
had a
thing,
Richard. Let me just Richard had a
yeah, please.
famous quote. His quote was, "You have to become something before you become nothing, and when you become nothing, you become everything." I believe that was his quote, and I loved it when I was younger. And then after a while, I started to not like it so much. I got what he was saying, but
Yeah,
I
it was not.
felt I don't need to eradicate my somethingness in order to become part of a unified field. They can both
Yeah,
exist at the same time.
I teach more that like we need to demote it. It's not so much about eradication
Mm,
rather than put it in its place. You know, and I don't mean put it in its place like take it down a few pegs in a shaming way.
mm.
I mean just like understand that it's there, understand that it has very important flavors to it. You know, a lot of our dark humor, a lot of my I have a thing that I do in the workshops a lot, which is popping the bubble of spirituality, of deliberately saying the wrong thing, teaching Sanskrit that doesn't exist, just doing stuff that is like totally unholy, um, so that no one, so that there's never any kind of superior trip going on. And there are all kinds of flavors of those kinds of areas that can be fun in the ego. It's like the ego is, I often think, is the nib of, sometimes the nib of the pen, but not the ink. It is a part of how we bring our unique flavor to the world, but it's just not the juice. It's not the juice itself. It's a filter. So yeah, the other thing I just wanted to speak to, because when you were talking about it, is, I mean, maybe I'm just like a bit whatever, but I don't believe in this idea of enlightenment in the way that I hear it talked about. I think everyone should just calm the fuck down with this whole idea of getting enlightened. The idea that anyone in the West who has a Facebook account is going to be getting enlightened this lifetime, for me, is absurd. And in fact, they're even concerning. I've had people even unbelievably come up to me. I think this lifetime I could do it. It's like, there's no way you're going to be doing that this lifetime. Are you crazy? Um,
Well, what's it?
Yes, for me, enlightenment isn't a human state. Enlightenment is like the Akashic Records. It's a place that is always there. It's a place. There is a space where enlightenment just is, just like there's a place where rage is. There's a place where depression is. There's a place where clarity is. It's a place. You can dip in and out of it. There's no human that is constantly only there.
Mm.
That I've met. I don't believe there isn't enlightened states, that there isn't this place where you can touch upon the place where you're totally free of it all for however long until the trip ends, or in some great samadhi moment. I don't believe that it's not attainable in moments or in periods, but I don't believe it's a finish line.
Well, I mean, neither do I, of course, but when you say it, what is the it that we're accessing at various moments? What is this thing called enlightenment?
Exactly. I have
Well,
no
you're no,
idea.
no, because you're not denying its existence. You're just saying it's something we dip into sometimes. So what
Yeah,
is that thing that we dip into?
yeah.
Like expansive awareness? I mean, what is
What
that?
I mean, the total non-buying of all the bullshit, traps, triggers, seductive things that take us out of just the pure presence of an appreciation of this moment.
Cool.
But even that doesn't say it. I don't know.
I
I mean,
like
as I
it.
said,
I like
I like
enreal. I
being
like
alone.
enrealment. It's just a little simpler for
Yeah,
me.
yeah, no, I like your
I'm
word
just
in real.
trying to get real. I mean,
Yeah,
and if I can be in all kinds of realms of the real, I feel closer to something I experience as kind of wholeness, and
yeah.
maybe that's what we're talking about or something.
And it might be different every day. You know, I did some work with this great company called the Forgiveness Project, which is a UK amazing organization, where they do like these lecture series of a guy who used to be an IRA terrorist bomber, lecturing on a circuit with a woman whose dad was killed in the blast of one of his bombs, and they lecture together. You know, these amazing things. And he was very eloquent about the subject of forgiveness and about how it's, again, not a finish line. It's something that you can feel today, and tomorrow you could be right back
Right.
not feeling it. It's not about, you know, we're so trained in school to get to the next level, take the exam, get to the next level, get that diploma.
Right.
Then
Right.
it's also linear. It's very hard, I think, for people with their spiritual path to, and even the word path gives you an image of somewhere where we go from here to there. And I always
Singular
think,
path. Right.
spiritual path. I mean, where are you going on your path? Away from right here, right now, where we all already are. Thank you very much. It's kind of deceptive. So yeah, it's a shame that we are so masculinely trained in our school years and in our, you know, get from A to B kind of mentality, that people attach that to their notion of spirituality, which isn't. It's not about getting. I tell all my students and my disciples, I tell them,
You
aim
you
low.
you, you sorry. You call them disciples.
Yeah. And
Interesting.
I tell them to aim low, low hanging fruit. Don't worry about deep scuba. Don't go for the big breakthrough. Just snorkel around the edges. That's enough. There's plenty of low hanging fruit. There's plenty for you just snorkeling around the edges. You might get caught in a riptide and pulled deep. Great. Don't resist it. But don't go for the big breakthrough. You're setting yourself against yourself the moment you do that, I believe. Just snorkel around the edges, just glance furtively towards it, just become a little bit curious, and you know, that's already enough. That's already a lot.
That's a lot. That's a lot.
So I'm the school
Absolutely.
of low hanging fruit.
That's good. That's a great school name, actually. The School of Low Hanging Fruit. It's everywhere, for fuck's sakes.
Yeah,
Absolutely. I mean, I think this emphasis on mastering a singular thread of consciousness, which is the whole mastery game in patriarchal spirituality, is a big part of the problem, because what happens is they become very well developed or very well versed in one lineage or a meditation practice or whatever their practice is, but they become completely underdeveloped in every other regard. Um, I would rather be a jack of all trades, master of none. I feel like that's closer to a more expansive or unreal consciousness. And that's the opposite of what my training was as a guy. I mean, I remember meeting this guy in Mexico after I left law and I wasn't sure which direction I was going. And I told him I'd left law and I'd worked with Eddie Greenspan, who was a prominent lawyer. We went through this whole thing. And his basic message to me was, oh, God, a jack of all trades, master of none. We don't need that. We need masterful men. And he was very masterful feeling, and he just sort of walked away like he was bored with me. And it was very stunning. It was like, oh God, I need to be a master again. I'm master. I need to perfect my body and perfect my beauty and perfect my brilliance. And then life happened. And I thought, this guy's lying. It doesn't work like that. We don't have enough time. It's impossible to focus only on one thing and then one day get to the other thing. We need to run the whole thing at one, whole gamut has to be happening at the same time. And we learn how to work those weaves and to bring those weaves together. So there isn't, like you said, one path. There's a whole ton of paths happening at the same time. And you're not
yeah,
climbing a mountain, you're just going deeper inside of yourself. So you're not higher than anything, you're just deeper and truer and more expanded. And
yeah. And I want to
the only
have as
thing that
many.
makes sense to me. Go ahead.
Yeah, yeah. I just want to say I want to have as many different ways to notice what's going on as possible. It's not about controlling what's going on or making the depression go away or making the anger go away or making the confusion even go away.
Hmm.
I just want to be there when it's happening. I want to be a black belt witnesser, black belt. You know, just notice all the time and not be too over put to sleep by. I think that most of the people I've come across that on this path, when a trigger happens, it becomes so convincing what's so suddenly so important. One of our little inner bodyguards kind of jumps in to sort of control what's going on, and we get like spiritual narcolepsy. The part of us that's awake and can notice often goes straight to sleep and then wakes up later once we've solved the problem. And I just want to stay awake to what's going on, not because I want to control it better, but just because I just want to be awake. I want to be an awakeful man who's accepting some days will be more angry days, some days will be more anxious days, some days will be more transcendent or creative or joyful. You know, I'm not here to try and change the graphic equalizer and make it much more joyful and get rid of all the anxiety. Although, when there is something live coming up and again, I want to check it out. And I admit there is a part of me that wants ease, but I consider my want for ease part of my humanity, and that I want to thrive. And then if my soul considers, if I have a soul, or if the bigger than my ego part of my life considers that I need to learn a big lesson, it's going to send it. I don't need to go looking for it. So I do want to thrive. I want to get the most out of every day I have alive. I want on my deathbed to know that I did it in a way that was authentic and fitted with how I think the world should be. I'm not saying everyone should think it that way, but like I have a big thing about 100% inclusivity. I just want everybody to be able to come to my stuff, workshops, events. I have a phobia that the idea of anyone not being able to come because of money just feels,
Yeah,
I'm not that guy who's like, well,
me
how
too.
much are you worth? Or, it's just like,
Yeah.
such a dumb reason to not be able to come. So it's like, we have 100% inclusive business. So we do have a ticket price, but if you can't pay it or you can only pay less, fine. And if you're totally
Yeah.
broke single
Great.
mother, we'll pay
Great.
your travel. Everyone's in, and we just trust that it will all add up in the wash, which it does. Um, and I charge a fortune for corporate things, and that floats as many people in my field do. One corporate gig can fund 6 months of workshops,
Wow.
for people who can't afford it. And I
Wonderful.
think that's fair and good,
Yeah.
as it should be. So it feels it does work out that way. But I do want to thrive, and I want my guys to thrive. And I think that one can find this sweet spot between constantly denying pain and constantly pushing away anything that isn't fluffy, while still wanting to feel good. I think it's legitimate to want to feel good.
It's nice to feel good.
Yeah.
Nice to feel good. So, Jamie, serious question. I mean, you spent a lot of time with Ram Dass. I mean, he died just before this pandemic. How do
Yeah.
you feel he would have seen this or languaged this for us
Yeah.
through all of his different facets and lenses and parts?
Well, I was watching something by him recently about fear. And I think that he would have probably wanted to talk mostly about the fear side of this, how it has sent everyone into this
Mhm.
fear.
Panicdemic.
Yeah. And he, you know, his whole gig in the end years of his life, he distilled his whole practice into 4 words: I am loving awareness. And he was very much about, where do you identify? Do you identify from the ego place, or the healthy ego place, or do you identify with the soul? And he was, as you know, all about
Yep.
identifying with the soul that accepts everything, and it's just stimulus happening, and da
Yeah.
da da da. And
That was his shtick.
yeah, and his advice to everyone around fear was, when you identify with the part of yourself which is ego, where even if it's healthy ego, you're going to be afraid of death, because you're all kinds of ego, healthy, unhealthy, and all of it does die when your body dies. So you're always going to be terrified of death. But when you identify with what he would call the soul, when you identify with that doesn't come and go, that doesn't change, the part that it all sits in, you're less afraid of death, because you're in the soul's place. Death is just things changing, another process of change which happens. And so he was very much advising people, not to avoid the ego, but turn on the other channel as well, that is the eternal channel, so that when death comes, you're not totally terrified. You know that part
Yeah.
of you,
Yeah.
you know. So I think when he talks about fear, he's very much saying, if you can, as much as possible, connect to the part of yourself that is one with everything, not to deny the ego, but if you can connect to the part of yourself that is part of the whole, part of all of it, then you're going to be less scared. And I think that would be kind of where he would be coming from, is like, don't get too caught up in the individual self-cherishing, self-preservation side to be all that there is. And also notice everything that comes up for you. Like he talks beautifully in the movie about when he's working with dying people, he does this meditation that they often do with Buddhist monks, where they sit in a cemetery and there's a bloated corpse in the middle, and they all just sit around allowing it to be. Just allow that and allow everything that comes up in the presence of the very vivid dead corpse, you know. And I think he would also recommend that, you know, like, rather than be doing everything to get away from it, can you be with this
The
play,
reality of it.
the reality of it, and notice everything that comes up in all your death terror, all your out of control terror, the government are trying to control us with 5G and whatever terror, all your beliefs around what possibly, you know, the totalitarian draconian laws that are being put in place now, the whole world's under house arrest, your money terror, where my business is closing, I can't open my bookshop terror, all of it. Can you be with this extreme upping of the ampage and notice yourself in it all, and learn as much about yourself and your edges and where you're stuck through watching your reactions to all this? Can you Vipassana it? I think he
Yeah.
probably recommends.
Yes. Or can you buy Passana it?
Yeah.
But that's probably is exactly what he would have said about how to approach the situation.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know, I don't know anything about your personal life, if you're in a relationship or you have
I'm
children.
married. I'm married. I have a stepdaughter, beautiful
In your
stepdaughter.
house? You're on
No,
lockdown?
she's living in the U.S., but we're living in Canada together, Susan and I.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
And how's lockdown been for you? I mean, I'm quite introvert, so it hasn't actually affected me very. I'm hasn't barely changed my life at all, to be honest.
Yeah.
How's it for you?
I mean, my working life is pretty much online. It's almost all organized online now. So in that regard, it hasn't at all. I'm doing a writing course. I'm still doing the course. It's active, but I think internally, it's been a callback to a survivalistic consciousness that I grew up with and have done my way to work my way off of as a primary kind of consciousness orientation. So I ride a wave internally of focused Jeff in his calling, honoring the next step on the path, um, and being pulled back into primal sensation. And, you know, I think I've had a very enrealed experience of this that is very similar to what many people have experienced. It hasn't been bifurcated, it hasn't been dissociative, I've been in all of it. And some days feel wonderful for a while until they feel horrifying. And you know, I feel like there's this organism called pandemic where it's not just about me coming into contact with my early stuff or my whatever I carry from my Jewish ancestry around lockdown, government control, all that, all those parts. But there's also this thing that's new to me because there's no precedent in my life or any of our lives really for this, which is, what is a pandemic feel like internally? What does it touch into collectively, energetically? Where is all this anxiety coming from if it's not coming from the reality of my daily life? And so I
Mm,
am doing a lot of watching, and I'm also trying to do a lot of discharging of the feeling because it feels like it's too much to hold at one time. Yeah,
right. Absolutely, yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
It is peculiar. I mean, there was a wonderful article written by this very cool guy who I'm sure you've come across, called Charles Eisenstein.
I
You come
know,
across?
Charles.
Yeah, he's a groovy guy. Um, and he wrote a beautiful, quite long thing called Coronation,
Hmm.
which I thought was really great. And the part of it that I really resonated with, in fact, I resonated with it so much, I started calling my famous friends and my animation friends and saying, could we do an edited animation version of this with Stephen Fry or someone narrating it? Because I thought it was so, the stuff about, you know, what kind of world do we want to be in? You know, like, what is at which point is, like, when we grew up, probably the same for you, you could stray an hour from home, a mile from home, and you would just be with the other kid. You know, we roamed much more freely. We ingested more bacteria. We we didn't have like cushion pads on the playground floors. It wasn't so kind of coddled.
Yep.
Nowadays, if you know, the childhoods we had, they would call the social, and the fear of living in a world now which is only plastic gloves, and like I do fear us normalizing over sanitized, over safe notions of life. Like there's another great artist or writer who, again, my girlfriend Anika has turned me on to, called Stephen Jenkinson.
Mhm.
He has a thing called Grief Walker and a book
It's
called
good
Die
stuff.
Wise.
Mhm.
And he is very eloquent and poetic on that subject of, like, like what is this kind of death denial doing for us? We're getting more, you know, when I was growing up, the grandma might die in the home, and it would be part of life. She was ill for a bit. You had to be quiet in the evenings. Then you'd only get to see her for a good night kiss. Then the curtains were closed a lot. Then she died. Then the body went out. It was all like part of a process that just was part of life. Now that old people very rarely die in the home, they're shipped off to some sanitized home, uh, where we don't have to face it, and we don't have to smell it, and we don't have to deal with it. We're becoming less and less in contact with death, and more consuming. And I do think the things are connected. That recreation, shops when I grew up used to be shut on Sunday. You couldn't, you
Yeah,
might
me
be able
too.
to get,
Me too.
you couldn't, and now Sunday is about shopping. It's about recreation with your family. Isn't a board game. It's not reading by the fire. It's not going for a walk. For most families, it's going and consuming. It's recreation, and family time has been now turned into consuming shopping time. And I don't want that to carry on. I love that's one thing I love about this pandemic, is how many shops are shut. Like, do we need 50 different kinds of moisturizer in plastic pots? Do we need all these different naff clothes brands like Prada and Chanel and expensive handbags? I'm glad they're all going out of business. Not that I want anybody to have a nervous breakdown, but I'm glad that so many superfluous products are not being bought and sold right now. you know
Mhm.
um,
I mean, I think
and
Ken Wilber called them substitute gratifications for God, I think.
Yeah, I really would like us to be more together. And I do know it's been very stressful for people. The domestic violence has gone through the roof, sadly, of course, predictably. But
And
the
so
idea of
so
having
have suicide,
homeschooling,
so have suicide rates, I think.
yeah, and that's awful. But the great idea that sort of homeschooling has now become a bit more fashionable, wonderful. The fact that people are going to have to learn some more communication skills, wonderful. There's an acceleration to certain sides of our nature happening here, alongside all the terror and the bad. Like, at what cost, I don't know. But yeah, I want to really push and support the sides of homeschooling, of nonviolent communication or responsible language within couples, learning how to relate with each other better, because the guy's not going to, or the woman, they're not separated at work all day. They're on top of each other in the house. So they better learn some better ways to communicate. Um,
God willing.
huh? God
God
willing.
willing.
Okay. So it's getting almost time. I've started lighting the Shabbos candles on Friday evening again for some reason.
Oh.
I'm not like a religious Jew at all. I had a mitzvah, but like my family were like kind of holy day Jews. But I've been really resonating with. That's the kind of thing that I almost like wish we could bring back. I used to laugh at the families who wouldn't let their kids out on Friday night. Now I get it. Like, there should be just like
Yeah.
one time where we're all together, even if you have to slightly force it on your kids, so be it. I just think, with all the different options and things and internet and everything else, it's kind of good to switch everything off for one meal and all be together. You know what I mean?
I mean, I think it would be wonderful if you insta-lived some of these things that you're doing that bring us back to what matters, because I think a lot of people either don't remember or were never exposed to the things you're talking about, you know?
Yeah.
I think it
We're
would
doing
be
a gathering
nice.
every Saturday morning UK time now, which doesn't have a special Facebook group, and it doesn't have a special Instagram account. It doesn't have anything. It doesn't even have a title. I call it the Lovely Gathering. And we have like 150 to 200 people that just come online together for two hours. And someone plays a guitar for a song, or says a poem, or has a little cry about how hard
Nice.
something
I
is.
love that. Are you doing
And it
that
has,
on Zoom? Are you doing that on Zoom? On your Zoom
yeah,
account?
I do it on Zoom every Saturday morning UK time, 11
Oh, I
a.m.
think I'd like to do that with people. I like that.
Please, the Zoom link
And
is
and
all.
is everybody visible and can be
Yeah,
heard, or do you decide who talks, or so they're not all?
everybody. So there's a function on Zoom where you can put your hand up, and I basically just unmute them one by one,
Oh,
and
that's wonderful.
everyone else is muted, and they say their thing. Everyone is very polite, about 2 minutes roughly maximum, uh, you know, and you know, there are certain faces that tend to come up more and more who have become like they have their little moment. There's a Reiki woman who's very sweet. She always gives her little take. There's a funny cafe owner called Cornelius in Austria who always gives his slightly intellectual, philosophical take. And there are these little sort of moments which have threads. But people have a little cry. Sometimes people celebrate the rewilding of nature. Sometimes week by week, everyone's hair's getting a bit longer and they're looking a little bit hairier. And there's just a beautiful sort of community of just sweet people, not doing
Nice.
anything special, just saying hi. You know, for some of them, they're
Nice.
like, "This is the only people I've spoken to since we did this last week." You know, um,
Sounds like the real enlightenment right there.
yeah, it's really beautiful, and of course it's free. People sometimes put $10 in my PayPal, you know, just to sort of, you know, help it all along. But you know, it's just free, and it's just a lovely way for us all to just to be and you know, notice, oh, this week did you hear, you know, or someone might want to say something about how scared they are about the government just put through a bill saying that doctors can vaccinate you now without your permission, or they, you know, let's look out for, you know, but it's not very worthy and it's not very wise. It's not like one of my online workshops where we're talking about creativity, or
Yeah, yeah.
I have a book called Insanely Gifted: Turn Your Demons into Creative Rocket Fuel. And it's just about dialoguing with your shadows and all your different characters inside and getting the most out of them, turning your demons into employees, basically. But it's very little me giving them suggestions. In fact, I don't say, I might sing one song, but very much it's really me just clicking on mute and saying, maybe having a response to something said, or saying, and yeah, when you say that, it makes me think of this, but then very quickly moving along. It's not the Jamie show, you know.
Got you. But speaking of the Jamie show, before we close out, do you feel like singing something for us?
Wow, I don't know if there's, let me just see if the guitar's in tune. That's a very sweet idea. One
Yeah,
second.
might be a nice way to close the recording.
Unlucky. I'm naked from the waist down, but we will work it out. Okay.
Good to know.
A little bit too much information. This is just a song that was inspired by the book Little Prince. Just always loved that book. You know that book by Jean Saint-Exupéry?
Yes.
Little.
Yes.
This is what came to me when I read that book. How's it sound?
Sounds great.
The desert breathed that day. It was quiet in the quicksand when he came my way, all alone again. That snake can swallow you whole. I get the picture now, so let me go. I was younger then. Where the boy fell, I saw an angel over the golden sand. The boy's been crying out to take your hand, feel the end. The devil and the deep blue sea. There's a wedding in the temple, won't you marry me? I'm gonna die here. And where the boy fell, I saw an angel. Where the boy fell, yeah, 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 I saw an angel. this brave illusion song came to show me where I was wrong. Every woman, every man, I am. Just an old story that I read. I could have made one up instead, but it was running around my head, and you know all the tales that I've been told. See their promises unfold. See those books upon my shelf. You can pick one out yourself. Run your eyes down any page. There's no need to be afraid. Wake the dragon from his sleep, then his treasure's yours to keep. Will you recognize his face when you come to take his place? For the terror of the human race, where the boy fell, I saw an angel. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Where the boy fell. I saw an angel. I saw an angel. I saw an angel.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you for indulging me in a little song. That was an unexpected treat for me.
Thank you. Just remind us your website again.
It's jamiecatto.com, JAMIECATTO.com. The book is called Insanely Gifted. It's on Amazon and all those Audible things. Audible is the favorite. And yeah, come and join in, even if you can't afford the ticket price. Everyone's welcome. If you want to be in the room, I want you in the room.
Yeah, beautifully said. Thank you, Jamie.
Thanks for having me. It's been beautiful to connect with you. I've loved your stuff for so long.
Thank you.